Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. This is a very important meeting this morning. It's a lovely morning in Maputo. It is Friday, 11 a.m. So I'm saying good morning, but it might be good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. The discussion today, it is on sovereign wealth fund to stabilize economies and catalyze good governance and inclusive growth. Mozambique, as you know, is set to become a giant, is set to become a next hub in fact, an emerging gas market in the next decade, despite the difficulties posed by the exceptional conditions that COVID-19 is impacting on the extractive industries all over the world, particularly on the emerging markets, mainly in Africa, with projects being grounded, being final investment decisions being delayed, and projects being sized down as international oil companies are struggling to maintain costs low, given the extraordinary difficulties that the industry is going through. But Mozambique, which is facing an insurgency in the north, Mozambique is set, as I've said, to become a giant, not only in East Africa, but in Africa, a giant in the LNG market. Well positioned, Indian Ocean, gas is clean, well-declassed gas reserves, everything is there. Mozambique has thus far collected few super revenues from the capital gains taxes. There were some issues there in terms of legislation to be applied, but it seems to be fairly solid now, the legislation. But there were some questions as to how that money was managed, and not really clear at some point. So that was an eye-opening to say, although we are long way to see super revenues to come, but we need to start to discuss the mechanisms, not only to collect, but importantly, to manage those super revenues that are set in one way or the other to come. So fiscal transparency is an important issue here, not only in terms of tax collection, management, but how will that be transmitted to the next generations? This is an important meeting. Countries that are rich, the early comers, they have faced challenges. Some of the challenges speaks to Dutch diseases, that speak to super revenues and whether the economy is ready to absorb those revenues or not. These are issues that have been faced in the history, and Mozambique can take advantage of this knowledge that exists out there, and civil society, the custodians of this wealth, the custodians, they are saying they want to have a say, they want to have a meaningful participation in how these resources are going to be managed. This webinar today and this series of webinars, it is aimed at learning from peer countries that went through the road that Mozambique is starting today. So the idea is to learn from those countries, to learn from peer civil society organizations on how they went about this. It's going to be a series of webinars. This is the first one, and guest speaker today is Dr. Benjamin. I will take through the program. With these introductory remarks, I will ask Dr. Jeniffer Adams, the USAID head of mission, to give a keynote speech, after which Dr. Anabela Rodrigues from Plataforma dos Recursos Naturais de Moçambique will give opening remarks. Dr. Paula Monjan from FMO will also give opening remarks. And then I will invite Dr. Benjamin Boakye from ACEP, our Ghanaian colleague, to share the experience from Ghana. After which, we have two important discussants here. The Mozambican authorities, they have also said they are part of this process, although it is a civil society platform, but they want to be part of that learning process. So we have here the Ministry of Mineral Resources and Energy, represented by Dr. Marcelina as discussant. She will take the floor. Then Dr. Anibal Malango from the tax authorities. They also said they are part of this conversation. They want to learn aimed at improving the instruments of governance of the extractives, and more specifically of the super revenues that are expected to come. He also have a take on what he will have had from the Ghanaian experience. Then Dr. Benjamin will reply to that. Only then I will open up the floor for discussion. For a few questions, we have a chat box. I'm inviting you to write your questions at the chat box, and then I will open up the floor, after which we will have a concluding panel. We're expecting to have a 2-hour discussion so that people will have time really to speak. Without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Jeniffer Adams. Over to you, Jeniffer Adams. Thank you very much. Jeniffer? Jeniffer? Hello, Jeniffer? She seems to be having some technological difficulties. She will be joining in a second. I will invite Dr. Anabela Rodrigues to give the opening remarks. Over to you, Anabela.
Thank you, Adriano. Good morning, everybody. As I explained before, I'm here representing the platform, the National Platform for Natural Resources and Extractive Industry. This is a platform that has almost 30 organizations affiliated, most of them in 7 of the 11 provinces that we have. So these are organizations that implement activities. We also have some think tanks. It's exactly the case of CIPE and CDD, who is a member of the platform. So we try to combine implementation of activities on the ground with the knowledge that is produced for those that dedicate themselves to do that, to do better advocacy. This platform addresses issues that are related to social concerns. For example, land rights. You know, the extractive industry usually, when they get established, we might have problems related to access to land by local communities. Economic issues. Some of the issues where this platform has been working are related, for example, to benefit sharing. How do a percentage of the revenues obtained are shared with local communities, how that arrives to them, how that is used, for what purposes it is used. Governance issues have been in the agenda. One of the concerns with these organizations is how to participate, how to be integrated in the debate and the decision taken to ensure that obviously they benefit from the exploration of these resources. We all know that many of them are exhaustible resources. So it's important to discuss how they are going to be used to diversify our economy and to make sure that we will have in the future a sustainable economy. Gender issues are also in the agenda. These organizations interact a lot with parliamentarians, creating to them opportunities for them to see what's happening on the ground and discuss with them how to improve the governance situation. They participate. We have representatives in the EITI at national level, so an opportunity also to discuss transparency issues. And obviously, in this context, the discussion about the Sovereign Wealth Fund is absolutely critical, because it's probably, when it comes, an opportunity to discuss how to make sure that we are going to use exhaustible resources to guarantee the diversity of our economy, investment in human capital, and the sustainability of our development. I would like to finalize by saying that one area of concern for us are environmental issues. And I will be very keen to try and understand how some of these sovereign wealth funds address the possibility to cover for environmental issues. We are having this discussion when the Mauritius oil spill took place, which is a good example of, that despite many similar cases having taken place in the past, we are still, as a society, not exclusively Mozambique, not addressing this properly, not creating the right conditions to address these kinds of events when they take place, despite the fact that they could be preventable. But not only do we not work properly in preventing them, but also we do not work properly in addressing them when they take place. So it's a good case to remind us that when we think about the sovereign wealth funds, let's not think that the environment is parallel to development. Environment or natural resources are the critical inputs for the development. So if we don't take care of biodiversity and the environmental services, our development will always be not sustainable. So with this, I'm really very interested to understand and learn from those countries that already have wealth sovereign funds. How can we also think not only about social and economic issues, but also environmental issues? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anabela, for highlighting the need not only to focus on the monetization, but also to consider seriously the issue of environmental impact, and considering that although gas is considered to be a clean energy, but there is clearly an energy transition now. So how Mozambique will feature into that conversation that is indeed urgent and has to be factored into key policies from this government. Without further ado, I will invite Paula Monjani. Over to you, Paula.
Thank you, Adriano, and thank you all speakers, guest speaker, Benjamin, Dr. Jeniffer Adams, Dr. Nibal Mbalango, and Dr. Marcelina Joel. And also, I want to greet my co-organizers, Anabela and Adriano. I'll speak on behalf of the Civil Society Budget Forum, a platform of 23 organizations organizations that works in public finance management. We have joined this effort to discuss issues related with management of the resources that will come from the exploitation of the natural resources. I'll just briefly give the context and why we as civil society organizations, particularly the FMO, is joining this initiative. As Adriano have rightly said in the beginning, after the discovery of natural gas in the Rovuma Basin, it is expected that in the next decade, Mozambique will become a reference in the global market, with a potential to produce more than 30 million metric tons per annum of liquefied natural gas, becoming one of the 10 large suppliers of the liquefied natural gas in the world. Despite the concerns and challenges related to uncertainties of the global market, that also Adriano have mentioned in the beginning, and also the internal context of growing military attacks in Cabo Delgado province, the government of Mozambique and Mozambique expect that the revenue and exploitation of liquefied natural gas can drive development, taking the country off the list of the we all know Mozambique is still one of natural gas master plan approved by the Council of Ministers in 2014 identifies several options for the management of tax revenues, from liquefied natural gas exploration, creation of sovereign wealth fund, of a national development plan, and development fund, financing of public channeling funds to the private bank system, direct. Also in 2019, the government announced the proposal of a sovereign wealth tax revenues will be ready or complete in 2020. This process is of interest of all organizations and Mozambique.
I cannot.
As the gains should contribute to inclusive growth and ultimately represent a real transformation in lives of ordinary citizens and children. I just want to mention this context, characterized by challenge in fiscal.
No, super.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
With some interference from my side.
Jeniffer. Yeah, okay.
Can mute.
Yeah, okay.
Everyone else can mute, then we can get clearer signal.
Yes, I was saying that I just want to mention and remember or make a reminder on the country's context, which is characterized by challenges in fiscal transparency, as also Adrian have mentioned, and also high levels of corruption. For instance, in 2019, Mozambique ranked 146 out of 180 countries in Corruption Perception Index, and it continues to suffer from the impact of hidden debts that contributed and triggered the economic recession in the last years. Lessons learned from sovereign wealth funds in different parts of the world reinforce the idea that models adopted in each country, and particularly good governance in managing revenue from the exploitation of natural resources, are crucial to guarantee the success. As FMO, we are interested that the process of constituting the sovereign wealth funds is inclusive, transparent, and above all, benefits from knowledge of varied expectations of the society. Thus, first, we expect that government will involve all sectors of societies, including civil society organizations and also citizens in the process. We have been requested, and we still insist that this is an important process for all Mozambicans. Second, as FMO, we intend to carry out several initiatives that aim on one hand to involve citizens and gather local expectations, on the other hand to collate and systematize international experiences in emerging oil and gas markets related to policy options for managing the extraordinary revenues these resources bring. That's why we have joined CDD and the Platform for Natural Resources in this series of international webinars to discuss and bring international experiences from the peers. And as Adriano have mentioned, today we will hear the experience of Ghana. So I want you to all to welcome you all who have joined us today for this webinar. Your interests and contributions are of the utmost importance in taking this discussion to society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. That was a powerful speech, Paula. So you are saying clear and loudly that having world-class gas reserves is important, but that will only be a game changer if governance is set right. That's what you're saying. If governance is set right. And you have also said that Mozambique is already suffering from the resource scarce, meaning that leaders have decided to eat part of the future. So that has to be factored in all these conversations. But without further ado, I'm inviting Jeniffer Adams to give us a keynote speech. Over to you, Jeniffer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Nuvunga, and thank you to the technicians at CDD. now in this era, we know how valuable they are. So thank you, and nice to see all of the panelists and all the participants. And I really appreciate this opportunity to participate in this first webinar on the important topic about sovereign wealth funds. So today's session is on sovereign wealth fund to stabilize the economy and catalyze good governance and inclusive growth. A big agenda, and one that we have already started to cover. So we're asking a lot from these sovereign wealth funds, and certainly the topic and the timing, as others have already said, just could not be more important here in Mozambique. Because of potentially very large extractive revenues in the not too distant future, timing always a little uncertain, but certainly in the not too distant future, it really is a unique moment and a unique opportunity that Mozambique has to transform its economy and possibly double or more than double its income over the next 10 years. So that's a wonderful opportunity, but it's also a very big responsibility, and it's a collective responsibility. So I really appreciate this opportunity to openly discuss and try to influence decisions on how to responsibly and equitably manage these kinds of revenues. So we need the stakeholders in government, civil society, private sector, academia to be part of a conversation to make sure that what gets prioritized in Mozambique are the needs of its citizens. We know from history and international practice that some form of a sovereign wealth fund is one excellent option for managing transparently public resources. If it's managed appropriately, a sovereign wealth fund can provide significant investments that benefit the country's overall economy, as well as planning ahead for current and future generations in Mozambique. It's possibly a means of economic diversification. And there are good examples, Ghana among them, of countries that have used a sovereign wealth fund to create an endowment for the future benefits, establishing savings that you can use in your economy in times of economic downturn, like what we're experiencing at the moment, so it's sort of a safety net. And also, obviously, in a country with so many current needs, to invest in underfunded public priorities, including infrastructure, education, and others. So, as others have mentioned, we also know that Mozambique economy is still recovering from public financial mismanagement and the over $2 billion in the dívidas ocultas, from the actions of Mozambican officials and international banks. So it is really important now, at this moment, that we have a pretty open and frank discussion on how a sovereign wealth fund in Mozambique should be designed and managed. So I'm really very happy that we have such great panelists today for this initial event. The guest speaker, Dr. Benjamin Boakye, is the Executive Director of Africa Center for Energy Policy, and he can give us a pretty insightful look at what happened in the experience in Ghana. And then in the future, we'll have opportunities to learn from other countries. I think learning from global experience in this area is a perfect start to an open conversation. I just wanted to mention that we at USAID are trying to support, this conversation and other ways to try to enhance a public debate on sovereign wealth funds and expand and disseminate information so that more people understand what the questions are and have an opportunity to participate in a discussion. So I know we will have some very difficult questions today. I hope we'll also have some ideas that are innovative. And I think it would be wonderful if everyone in this conversation goes back and has further conversations with people in your networks to try to spread some of these ideas and some of the interest in a sovereign wealth fund and an understanding. So I think we really hope that these future revenues from oil and gas will be of huge benefit to this generation and future generations in Mozambique. It's sort of a unique chance that we have right now to lay a firm, good foundation for effective, proper management here and in the future. So it's important to everybody that this gets done right. And I'd like to thank CDD for putting this on the agenda and offering all of us the opportunity to participate today. So thank you, and estamos juntos.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you very much for cautioning us about the challenges. Not easy to set governance right, let alone making it inclusive for inclusive outcomes and inclusive development. But this is the agenda for this country. Many countries that are rich in natural resources, they have alienated the participation of their populations in the governance because they can simply rely on the windfall incomes, which are not necessarily managed transparently. They undermine the institutions much needed, as Douglas North would say, and the World Bank would agree in that institutions matter. Without further ado, I will invite our guest speaker, Benjamin Boakye, my good friend. Please tell us how the Ghanaians have gone through this process. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. And it's exciting to be part of this important conversation. I think I gave an earlier caveat that I'm not a doctor. So I think the participant can take note of that so that we don't create confusion anywhere. I would, for this presentation, want to share a slide. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. So if you can allow me to do that. So would you allow me to share my screen?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Go ahead.
So I've done that, but you have to enable the screen sharing from your end. It is blocked from my end. So. I don't know, you're on mute. We can hear you.
Yes, while I'm asking the technician to take us through, it is fascinating that you in Ghana, not only you are the first wave of independence, but you have a solid and vibrant democratic system. And there seems to be some correlation between your solid democratic system and the levels of governance, including of the World Sovereign Fund. You could start reflecting on that while we're asking the technician to take us through the technicalities of your presentation.
No, thank you. I think where Ghana is and the kind of laws that has shaped the governance of our resource sector really has to do with how we have deepened democracy over time and allow public participation in policy making over time. I think when we discovered oil in 2007 and then started production, between the space of discovery and actual production, a lot of conversation ensued, and the public became very active. Civil society was very active to ensure that we can build systems and take advantage of the space, the democratic space, to make input into the governance arrangement around oil. So that is what actually informed a new approach for managing our oil resources. We were also mindful of the fact that as a country, we were very experienced as far as natural resources are concerned. Ghana has been producing gold, bauxite, manganese for several decades. And the consensus of Ghanaians were that we haven't seen much benefit, from those resources. Or if you like, there hasn't been enough transparency and accountability around how the output or the benefits of those resources are used to. So we're conscious to ensure that the new resource, which was oil, took a different dimension, a different shape in the way we govern the resources. Am I on? Right. So we were mindful to ensure that there was a deviation from how the resources have been managed over time. Okay, I think I can now share. 1 second. Okay, can you see the screen now? Right, okay, so I actually started the presentation. So that public engagement actually brought what we call the Petroleum Revenue Management Act. And that was essentially to ensure that we deviated from how we had managed the solid mineral resources, where transparency and accountability was not prominent. So the Petroleum Revenue Management Act became the fiscal frame for managing our resources, and essentially showed how allocations are made to the budget and also prescribes that we should look at the sustainability of the future budget. So in that frame, for the future budget, we're looking at the short-term consideration, where because of the nature of the industry, where cyclicality is a characteristic of the industry, price can change at any time and your expectations will not be met. So we set in law what we call the Stabilization Fund. And what that fund was to do essentially was to ensure that if you program to spend X amount of money in a particular year, and because of price volatility or production uncertainties, you are not able to meet your expectation, you would have a buffer or a fund that you can draw on to be able to stabilize your budget. But that is also part of what we call the sovereign wealth fund in this context, because without spending that money, it will still be available for future use. So we have the stabilization fund. And then we also created a long-term budgetary support mechanism, which we call the heritage fund. And that is the typical sovereign wealth fund that you would have. So the heritage fund was to remain untouched and for future purposes, and to be put into long-term instruments outside government processes or the control of central government or the administrative government. So that is the structure. We have support for the budget for every year, and then we have a short to medium term smoothing mechanism called a stabilization fund, which is there to smoothen the budget when there are difficulties, like we have in COVID-19 world where prices have collapsed and you're not going to have enough revenue. And then we have a long-term perspective through our heritage fund. So if you put the fiscal model in perspective and how we distribute the fund, our petroleum revenue into the various funds, we have an account called Petroleum Holding Fund. So that is where every money coming from oil goes to. There's a central pool of funds. We put in the Petroleum Holding Fund. And out of that fund, the investment need and of the National Oil Company and their participation, cost of participating in oil blocks, are taken out or prioritized from that fund. So when you take out allocation to the National Oil Company, what is left becomes what we call the benchmark revenue. So this is a revenue that is within the control of government to further distribute into different accounts that are emphasized in the law. So the benchmark revenue is then divided into two main accounts. One for the support of the budget, as I mentioned. So you take out the National Oil Company's share, and then what you have is further broken into two. One goes into the budget, and the law says that up to 70% of the benchmark revenue goes into the budget to support government expenditures for the year. And then the remaining 30% goes into the petroleum funds. So that is what I mentioned, the Heritage Fund and the Stabilization Fund. The 30% down there is further broken into the Heritage Fund, which is supposed to be up to 30% of that of the petroleum fund, and then 70% goes into the Stabilization Fund to be able to smooth in the budget. The component that goes into the budget for every year, the law prescribes that it goes into planned public investments in line with our national development plan. In the absence of that, which we don't have, the law prescribes that the Minister of Finance prioritizes no more than 4 sectors in the medium-term arrangement where that fund, that 70% can be spent. Then you have an unrestricted component that can support other budgetary expenditures that are outside the medium-term framework expenditures, which is the 70%. So what the law also prescribes is that when Ghana doesn't have oil or we have depleted our oil resources, the Heritage Fund and the Stabilization Fund will together become the Petroleum Wealth Fund. So that is the fund that would then sustain contribution to the budget. So they'll come together to now contribute to the annual budget funding amount. So dividends from the Petroleum Wealth Fund and the operations of the National Oil Company will form a new avenue for budgetary support when we don't have oil. So this is the architecture, if you like, of Ghana's petroleum revenue management. So we have allocations to the budget, which is 70%, up to 70% of every revenue that is received into the budget, and then 30% goes into saving. And the component that goes into saving, a portion is to attend to the difficulties that emerge along the way, and then 30% goes into a heritage fund. So I want us to look at how we have performed. We have a brilliant law, but I want us to look at how we have performed so far. If you look at the blue line, that is the cumulative allocation to the stabilization fund that we have, which I mentioned is supposed to support the budget when we have a difficulty. The gray line is the cumulative allocation and balance of the heritage fund, which is not so much as compared to what has gone into the stabilization fund. But if you look at the orange line, which is what we do have year on year outstanding balance of the stabilization fund, you will see that even though so much has been allocated on the blue line, what we actually have in the account is the orange line. This is because, as I mentioned, the Minister of Finance is allowed to withdraw to support the budget when there is difficulty. And also, the Minister is allowed to cap the stabilization fund to a limit. And then the excess over the cap, what it means is that it can limit the value in the fund. And further allocations will then go to support debt repayment and contingency spending. So you would realize that we have a law that makes allocation for difficult times, but you check the balances, they've always been below $400 million. And the fiscal challenges that have been injected into the economy as a result of oil price drop in 2014-15 and just 2020, from our experience, we realized that the outstanding balance of the Ghana Stabilization Fund has not been able to deliver on its mandate because we have been focusing on debt service expenditures and not actually achieving the object of the law to have a fund that will be able to mitigate challenges that you have. In 2020, because of COVID, we are expecting that Ghana will lose close to $800 million of the projected revenue, but do not have the balance to be able to do that, to be able to stabilize the shortfall that is injected by COVID. So it highlights that you could have a brilliant law, but if it is not properly implemented, you will not be able to achieve the object of the law. So it is just the stabilization fund that keeps growing slowly to the point where we have about $600 million currently sitting in that account. So when it comes to sovereign wealth funds, there are contexts of ideas. And in Ghana, we are faced with those contestations. And people have positions. People are against sovereign wealth funds, and you have people who are for sovereign wealth funds. And primarily, if you check the graph to the right of your screen, you will see, a whooping deficit year on year, which has ranged between $3 billion and $7 billion from 2011. And this is a country that requires a lot of resources. And again, we are pushing for savings. So those who think we don't need a saving think that we can rather finance part of that deficit with the sovereign wealth fund and scrap it all together, because you are borrowing at an average rate of 12% from the international market, and then you have a sovereign wealth fund that is yielding returns of about 2% on the average. So it doesn't make sense to do that. You rather want to invest the money than put it into savings and still borrow to finance your expenditures. There are others who also argue that in spite of the difficulties that you have with your budget, you still have to save. You still have to put some money aside to be able to make your budget sustainable. Because if you have situations like COVID and you don't have savings, then you have to look to elsewhere to be able to make the critical investments that are required to keep your people safe, to keep your budget running. So savings is a good thing. You may have a difficulty, but you still have to be able to contribute to your savings account to be able to sustain your budget. And also the return on those investments will be available for future budgets. When you don't have oil, then you can rely on the sovereign wealth fund that would have been built over time to be able to smoothen your difficulties in the budget. So those arguments are also made for sustaining the budget. So the investment options for sovereign wealth fund, it's also a context of ideas where people think that you could be, more bolder to put in more riskier instruments to generate the right returns. In Ghana's case, the law prescribes that we invest in low-risk instruments, government bonds outside that of Ghana government, which usually doesn't yield much. And also, it prescribes that we shouldn't invest it on the domestic market. Some are of the opinion that even if we need to have sovereign wealth fund at all, we should rather look at investing in the domestic market so that it can contribute to the development of the economy, to boost, the local economy and also generate some higher returns rather than, the 2% and those low returns that we are seeing on the investment. So these are, hotly contested positions on what, we can actually invest in. But what we see, as a risk for investing sovereign wealth funds in developing countries really is that where you have weak accountability, and you don't really have institutions that account and are efficient to actually deliver value for the people, you may end up injecting the sovereign wealth fund into those weak institutional setups. And In Ghana, there are many complaints on accountability around oil revenues. And recent conversation we've been having really is where about 1.5 billion of what has gone into the budget really is. We see the balances showing, but we don't know where that money really is. And even some projects that receive funding from the budget, you try to track the projects and they don't exist. So you have ghost projects, So is that the frame that you want to put the sovereign wealth fund into? Or we should still keep saving the money until such a time that we think that the environment is much more transparent and accountable to receive the sovereign wealth fund. So efficiency of spending also tends to be a real problem. The quality of projects, when the funds are available, friends and family contractors, gets the job and they poorly deliver the project and nobody holds them accountable. So these are public financial management challenges that makes it difficult for you to, whilst thinking about the future, then invest the money into the local economy. So these are very important issues to really consider when a country is contemplating investing sovereign wealth funds into the domestic market. But this is what we see, the way forward to be like for African countries and resource-rich countries. We think that countries need it. It's important that you have sovereign wealth fund to actually recognize the intergenerational equity in the resources that are being extracted. And also, in particular, to look at the contribution of the sovereign wealth fund to the budget, to be very critical, to be able to smoothen your budget, and also recognize the fact that there are so many unknowns around the exploitation of natural resources. It's finite. We make assumptions about how much volume exists underground, and we don't even know how the energy transition is shaping. 10 years ago, we thought solar energy couldn't become prominent, and here we are. Efficiency is improving, technology is improving, oil is becoming less relevant, right? So we don't know what next, and therefore those considerations should inform the need to actually save. For investment options, we think that low-risk instruments are important, particularly when the fund is not big enough to actually diversify into riskier ventures. You really need to ensure that you are stabilizing the fund at the barest minimum and not expose it to risky ventures that could actually end up depleting the fund. And also on domestic investment, I think it's an area that we can have a bigger conversation on what structure can work, so that we're not just dropping it into the poor public financial management framework that we do have around. So we cannot inject sovereign wealth fund into the poor governance framework that we see dotted around Africa. So we think maybe we can explore an independent investment vehicle that experiments, independent oversight over the sovereign wealth funds to see how differently that can be. Sometimes also you bring civil society, you bring private sector, and you don't achieve the same results. But if over time we can experiment with part of the sovereign wealth funds and see how that can be different, that strategy can be different from the public investment expenditures, that could be an experiment that would generate a result different from the poor governance that we see with public financial administration. So we could have private sector, civil society, and even if you like, development partners, oversight panel that would oversee a portion of local investment of part of sovereign wealth fund into the domestic environment. And that essentially should also pay attention to the fact that the investment should be sustainable. It should repay whatever investment that we put in the money to. We should be able to recover the money with interest, as we would have done in foreign bonds and other investments. So this is what I have to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Benjamin Boakye, for this brilliantly presentation on the Ghanaian experience. The paradox is there. The paradox is there. On the one hand, there is a recognition that giving a green light for governments without track record in transparency and accountability to spend these resources, because the need is there. The need is there. Infrastructure, alleviating poverty, empowering, investing in schools, that need is there. But giving the green light for these monies to be invested at one go, that can be a recipe for disaster. Given the context that you have clearly alluded to that of lack of transparency and accountability. And the issue then of paradoxy is how do you ensure that such a sovereign wealth fund is managed, or it is not itself a recipe for a resource curse. I have seen countries with abundant resources in which their annual budgets, the biggest item in their annual budgets, it is for precisely to pay debts related to the sovereign wealth fund. So sovereign wealth funds are not anymore a guarantee that they will be managed if, as you have alluded to, there is no, they are not set up in the right manner with checks and balances and with external oversight that you have talked about. And the participation of civil society is once again seen as catalyst here, and therefore the need for us as the custodians of these resources to tap into the existing technological resources to share their experiences. We have the Mozambican authorities are present in this conversation. That is good. That is part of good governance. It is part of good governance that the authorities, they take part. Inclusiveness and dialogue, it also entails the state to participate in civil society discussions, to understand, to learn, and to have the take of what are the perspectives from civil society. So I commend that as an important aspect and political will to set things right. We have two representatives of the state here. We have the Ministry of Mineral Resources and Energy, represented here by Directora Marcelina, and we have the tax authorities, represented here by Dr. Anabela Malango. Gender matters. So we have two. We have one woman and one man. Because of the gender issue, you all know whom will I invite first to speak. Over to you, Dr. Marcelina.
Thank you very much. As I mentioned before, I think from the government side, this idea of creating savings for the future and for the future generation, it is always there. Because as I said, from 2014, when we took the mining law and the petroleum law to Parliament to update it, this issue came in between, and there was a huge discussion because there was a proposals from civil society and some MPs. They wanted to understand better from our side, from the proponent, which was the government, whether we should consider this proposal in these two laws or not. I remember that time what the former Minister of Mineral Resources said. She did not say no, neither yes. She has raised the question: which country has established the sovereign fund without petroleum? That was the question she has raised. And there was, from that period, the Minister of Mineral Resources has engaged with different institutions like University of Columbia, of USA, and we have had several conferences with them, and we have shared different experience from other countries, and they came up with several proposals as well. And we did not stop from that. We continued searching and trying to see from other countries how these funds established. We have gone to Brazil, we have gone to Timor, we have gone even to Norway, which is considered as the best sovereign world fund. I mean, the best world sovereign fund, wealth fund we have seen so far. And continuing these discussions, last year in March, through the central bank, we hosted a seminar on this discussion. Actually, that was not a starting point of discussion, it was a continuing of the discussion that started back far. And from what we have learned up to now, I still have questions. And I thought from this presentation, I will a little bit be more relaxed and go back and tell Minister that, look, we should go ahead with the setting up, or we should go ahead with the establishing of the sovereign fund. We understand that this is important, but there's a questions that we have to make, and I still have it. When to establish this sovereign fund? How much money should go to that sovereign fund? Who would manage this sovereign fund? What are the rules of the management of this sovereign fund? Because from the Ghanaian experience, which is a very excellent one, and I think this is not coming from the government, right? Because perhaps if we could hear the government perspective would be different. But it's good that it didn't come from the government side, because people tend to consider people from the government as hiding things, not sharing difficulties or not sharing challenge. But I'm here, in fact, sharing that challenge that we're facing. We still don't have, up to now, even from the Ghanaian experience, answers on how to manage, when to establish. Because from the presentation, what I've seen is that you have discovered oil in 2007. But I could not figure out when you started exploitation that. And actually, I missed as well when you have established that fund. But from the gap I saw, from the blue line and the orange line, I think something's wrong. And if something's wrong, then we must figure out what is wrong. And he has explained it through the presentation, or what's not wrong, or what is not solid. So that is a lessons learned from the Ghanaian presentation, and we thank you. But my questions remain. because from the Norwegian experience, when we had this conversation with them, we went to Norway, they came to us and they participate in that conference. We asked them, what they told us is that when they discovered the oil, they just shut their mouth and sit down and discussion on the legal framework, the appropriate legal framework, establishing the criteria of granting of that rights to explore and exploit the oil. And after 20 years of exploiting the oil, only after 20 years of exploiting the oil, they established the sovereign fund. And the decision of establishing this sovereign fund, this sovereign wealth fund, did not come through a law. That was political parties who sat down and discuss and come up to a conclusion that yes, is need to establish that sovereign fund. And only after that, they established that fund. And they have gone through showing us how they're managing it. And actually, you cannot compare the population of Norway and the huge resource that they have and the population of Mozambique. Perhaps we can use their experience to establish our sovereign fund, but we also have some cases like Timor, where they have discovered the fund and people from the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, they go to them and tell them, hey, put the money abroad, don't touch that money. It's for the future generation. Then as a result, in Timor, there was a problems with the schools, lack of infrastructure, education system, health. Then when these people go back to Timor, what the Prime Minister of Timor, or the President, I think that time said, when they asked him about the infrastructure, about the education system which was collapsing, about the health system which was not adequate one, he told them as an answer, please don't ask me about all these questions because you came here yesterday and you told me to put the money abroad. Then the money is there. It is generating more funds for the future generation. But how about the needs of the current generation? So we also have to think about that. In Mozambique, we're still struggling with the many basic needs, like the education, even to feed our people. We're still importing tomato from South Africa, which means that we cannot produce to feed our people. So if that revenue starts coming, let's say 2023, 24, X year, it comes, what will be the priority? Will be to establish this sovereign fund, or will be first to meet the needs, the basic needs that we have, and then think about the sovereign funds? So as I said, I don't have answers. I came here to learn. We still have these questions to answer. And from this webinar, I hope and I believe to go back and tell Minister, forget and be relaxed, because all these questions that we have before, we now have questions. We now have answers to them. So I'll stop from here and hear from the others. But as I said, we're open. The instruction that I got from the minister is that go there, learn as much as you can, and come back with a proposal so that we can go to the parliament with the mining law and the petroleum law, which are currently under revision, with a good proposal or a good news for the people of the Mozambique. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Proud of you, Dr. Marcelina. Proud of you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm happy to hear that you have been touring peer countries, including Norway, to learn. State building, it entails learning. It entails experience sharing. To get things done in the right way, it entails learning. So I'm happy to learn that you have been doing that, and this series of webinars, it will be a contribution to that for this much needed national conversation aimed at setting things right for the on how we will harness our natural endowment to bring the much needed development for our people, for this and the next generation. Thank you so much. I'll now hand over to Dr. Anibal Malango. To you, Dr.
Thank you, Mr. Adrian Nuvunga. And also I want to thank Mr. Benjamin with the good presentation that he gave. I think that when we want to talk wealth found for this natural resource, about where the resource or where the money will coming from. And when we talk about where the money will coming from, we are talking about the one who has to commit himself to collect that money. I'm talking about the revenue authority, that institution that I'm representing now. To make sure that this revenue will flow to the government, we are taking some acts since also 2014, when we do some changes in our revenue administration. Because we believe that when only with the building capacity to the staff, we'll engage ourselves to collect with efficiency these resources. It's why we establish a unit that this is dealing only with the sector, extractive sectors, to have a good performance to capture more revenue. It's why we are also we're proposing tax policies, and we are doing revenue forecast. And why we're doing that? We are doing that now to prepare ourselves that when the project, for instance, the LNG project of Area 1 and Area 4, they will start production, we will make sure that we build the good environment to collect with efficiency the revenues. For more transparency, we are now with development here in tax administration, a tax returns, that these tax returns will collect easier the information from the taxpayers in order that everyone can check with more details what have been paid and what have been declared and what have been paid from the tax authority. As you know, Mozambique is complying with the ITI, and also tax administration is a part of it, providing the information. It's why we are building this capacity to be able to show to everyone, to the citizens of Mozambique, what exactly is being collected. But also we need to know what kind of revenue we expect to have. I was hearing here from the experience of Ghana, where they have from the taxes, and also they have for the National Petroleum Company. I think that in Mozambique also we have to think about. I think that in this 7 section that we'll have for this discussion, what we have to discuss also is what kinds of revenues will flow to the fund. If we'll take all of them, in Mozambique we have a specific fiscal regime, and this discussion must be that what kind of revenue also we have to finance the wealth fund, and probably to make sure Mozambique is now has Mozambique Revenue Authority now has staff that are specialized to audit these kinds of company. And I think that this will be extremely important. I think These staff are few at the moment, but our commitment is to increase the number of technicians that are being able to monitoring and to control the flow of the revenues. I would like to hand my short speech asking to Mr. Benjamin, because in your presentation, you didn't tell us what you did before you established your fund. I would like to know from the Ghana experience, what is the role of the tax administration in the sovereign fund or in the heritage fund? And Ms. Anuvunga, I think for now, I will stop here. I will be available for another comments. And I made a question to Mr. Benjamin of the role of the tax administration in his country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Anibal Mbalang, for giving us a good account of the kind of preparedness, the efforts that you are putting forward, aiming at getting ready for the time that these super revenues will come. But as I've said, there are questions also as to how some of the very few kind of capital gains have been that you collected were managed. So it's important that we're in this, and the reason why we're two institutions is also for the policy coherence from the government side when it comes to management and fiscal transparency. Thank you very much. Now I will hand over to Benjamin to respond to this first wave of questions and comments from the discussants, and then we will open up for the panel discussions and where I will read the questions from the chat box. Over to you, Benjamin.
Thank you very much, Prof, for this. And very important questions, and I hope I will be able to clarify a lot of things for Dr. Marcelina, right? Yes. So what I tried to do really to also look at some of these same contestations that do happen when you want to set up a fund and you have budget constraints as a developing country, so to speak. And in Ghana's case, the same questions arose. When do you set up the fund? Do you wait 10, 20 years before you do it the Norwegian way, or you can set it ab initio from the word go? And civil society and other stakeholders were firm in their belief that we could start from the first receipt of oil. So we started production in late 2010, and first revenue came in 2011, and immediately started, putting money aside for the implementation of the law, which is the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So we started right from the beginning. What we also have to note is that if you have almost 91%, if you do the breakdown, almost 91% of the revenues available to the budget. So what you are rather putting aside for savings, because if you saw the trend, what is going to the Stabilization Fund is already exhausted by government for other expenditures, for debt service and contingency spending. What is actually into the long term is about 9% of the total revenue. So you couldn't build the schools with the 91%. You couldn't build the hospitals with the 91%. You're not going to do that with the 9%. And I think that is an important consideration to have. And also looking at the fact that it's a unique industry that has challenges. And I did mention that we don't know what, we can only predict that things will go well. But it's not an industry that all gets rosy. In most situations, you have oil prices collapse, you have production cut. And Ghana, in the last 10 years, we've seen so much. We saw the huge oil drop from $114 to $40, around $40, $45 in 2015. And now, in 2020, we had oil prices dropping sub 30, you know. So these are realities that the government should pay attention to and realize that, yes, we may have difficulties, but we need to also, because it's not only oil revenues or resource revenues that can be used to create sovereign wealth funds, but because we haven't practiced that, we don't have sovereign wealth fund, we don't have savings. In most of our country, we don't even have contingency fund. So we have problems that we are running to the IMF. We have problems we are running to the World Bank. You know, but these are opportunities we create savings that can be available to support the budget when we have difficulty. So Ghana's option was to start from day one to put money aside for future budget. I stress future budget because if we are told tomorrow we don't have oil, what we have to contribute to the budget is a sovereign wealth fund. You know, so we shouldn't often think about a certain future people or generation, but rather the future budget, which could be 5 years, could be 10 years, could be 20 years, could be 100 years, an unknown period. You know, so that planning becomes really, really important. Management of the fund, it is our central bank that manages the fund. And we haven't had problem with the way they have managed the fund, except that people argue that the instruments that are prescribed in law, which are the low risk instruments in sovereign bonds, generate lower returns. And people would think that if you're borrowing at 12%, then you have to take more risk and invest in high return instruments that can actually generate revenue. And that's what I mentioned, that the intention of the sovereign wealth fund is to at least stabilize the revenue, not to risk it. Because the higher the interest, the higher the risk. You could lose the money. And the framers of the law thought that we could be more conservative and ensure the stability of the fund rather than going to riskier ventures that could wipe the money at some point. As to the framing, as I kept saying that we can still calibrate and think through what works and within our context. But the main challenge really for domestic investment is the public administration, which we're struggling to improve, public financial management administration, which we are struggling to improve to optimize the revenues that we spend. And if we can have a way around that and still maintain the value of the sovereign wealth fund, it could be invested locally. If we have an independent oversight body that would do roads and do the road and ensure that the revenue can come back to the sovereign wealth fund and be able to deliver on that purpose of ensuring that, you know, the future budget can also have a sustainable support from the sovereign wealth fund. That could be an approach, but it all depends on the context and the kind of engagement that actually happen around it. And like I mentioned, in Ghana, it was a very extensive consultation that brought about the law that we do have. So don't tell your boss that tomorrow we should sign it off. Let's go do sovereign wealth fund, but engage broadly, engage with civil society, engage with academia, see what works for Mozambique. And once we are honest about the conversation, we know that Mozambique, this is what works for us. I think the country will be better with the options that would be taken. The role of the tax administration, Dr. Anabela, I mean, the tax administrators collect all the revenue for Ghana. I stated that we have a petroleum holding fund where all revenue goes to. This the participation interest of the National Oil Company, royalties, and surface rentals. Everything goes into the fund that is collected by the the tax authority, with the Ghana Revenue Authority in our case. So they collect the revenue on behalf of the states. And when it comes to the sovereign wealth fund, they don't have any role in how it is managed. That is managed by the Bank of Ghana. And we also have an investment advisory committee established by the Minister of Finance to advise on the instruments. But it hasn't really been effective because at the same time, the law prescribes the instruments that we can actually put the money. So the investment advisory committee hasn't really been effective at actually managing the fund. There are proposals currently for us to empower the investment advisory committee to be able to diversify the instrument that they can put the money to. But that is still being discussed. And we will see how robust and transparent the proposals will give us to consider them. So this is the response I have for the questions that came. Yeah. So, Prof.
Thank you very much, Benjamin, for taking us through. I will open up the panel for the discussion. I have a couple of questions. But it seems that Anabela has a question. So I will give her 1 minute to ask that question directly, given that she's here as panelist. Anabela, over to you. 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Adriano. I mean, my question is related to this investment, domestic investment, the possibility for the domestic investment that I'm sure will be raised as we have this discussion. And the question I would like to put to you is, do you think that if we create a mechanism that is managed properly, let's say by a bank or a coalition of professional institutions that are used to manage funds, against some kind of regulation that stipulates maybe priority areas depending on the situation of the country? And I'm very tempted to think that we have a very large population that are youngsters trying to begin their businesses or trying to begin their life. And unfortunately, we do not have mechanisms to provide significant support to this youth. You know, we have around 300,000 people that get out of university per year, and the market can only absorb 100,000. This is more or less the numbers. They might change a little bit here and there. So thinking about the youth, thinking about small and medium entrepreneurs, could not part of these funds be used to provide loans for these people to invest? And this will be a way, if it is properly managed, so I will not be in favor of putting this kind of management in the hands of the government, for the citizens to feel the benefits of the management of this natural resources, because this is the problem. We have a lot of wealth if we explore it and produce and export, but how do we make sure that the citizens feel the benefits and the results of that? This is one question that I would like to put. But allow me, Adriano, to make a very small comment. I would be very keen to be in favor of what Dr. Marcelina said when she was saying, okay, we are creating savings for the future, but we have problems presently, lots of challenges to address and to respond to the needs of citizens. Well, knowing well the situation of our country, this is usually the argument that we use. But when we use this argument, we tend to forget that we could be much better off than we are already, even with all the difficulties that we have. If we didn't have the level of corruption that we have in this country and the level of mismanagement that we have in this country. So thinking that we will wait 20 years to create this sovereign fund because we need to address immediate needs, I don't think is the way to go. Because Norway, yes, they waited 20 years, but they also were careful enough to not put all their resources under exploration. They did put a small percentage so that they could learn their lessons. This is the first thing. The second thing is that we don't need to repeat. I mean, we need to learn from others. So if we can do it more quickly than the others did, because we learn from what worked and what did not work, then we can do probably better. Thank you, Adriano.
Thank you so much, Anabela. I think Benjamin has taken note of that question and also comment to Dr. Marcelina. But from the chat box, I have more comments than questions. What our participants are asking or commenting on is their take on what we think it can be our contribution as civil society. What we are saying is that world sovereign funds have been used elsewhere, either to stabilize the economies or being used as saving mechanisms, also as instrument to transmit wealth from the present to future generations. This is what has so far been the use of the World Sovereign Fund. What we are saying today is, can this sovereign fund be used, particularly its designing, the process of designing it, being used to catalyze good governance, particularly fiscal transparency? Benjamin, you said that in the case of Ghana, and remember, prior to your presentation, I challenged you to look into how your relatively solid democratic system that prior to discovery of oil in your country, you already had some level of democraticness of your state architecture. How that catalyzed the relatively okay levels of governance of your sovereign funds. What people are commenting on is whether it is realistic, our nuance of saying that we can and we aim and we endeavor at using these designing this conversation to catalyze good governance, aiming at having relatively solid fiscal transparency. Do you think that this is possible, given the context, which although you have a relatively well-functioning, relatively well institutionalized democratic system, but you have your own challenges? But of what you know, ACEP, which is a West African organization, you have a lot of activities in Benin and throughout West Africa. So you know this. So tell us, this is the key question now to you after elaborating on how you went about establishing the World Sovereign Fund. Over to you, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you again, Prof. I think, for democracy, I think that's what we are practicing here. And I'm happy to see important institutions of Mozambique, like the Revenue Authority, Ministry of Finance, participating. And that is how it all starts. You only need to broaden it to bring the wider public into the fray, into the conversation. And that is how it starts. Again, to stress that in Ghana, you can say anything and freely so, nothing would happen to you. And we have deepened that over time. And that has worked really well for us. Civil society is quite active and vociferous to argue their cases out and galvanize the populace for a conversation with government. Help government also to know what the public wants. And if governance is about the people, then of course at all times you want to listen to them. The challenge we also have sometimes, they will listen and they will not do what the public want. That is also another side of the democracy that we have. But largely, the fact that people can freely articulate their position and galvanize public support for policy making really, really helps in shaping policy and the way we want to see governance happen in our context. And I think this provides an opportunity. Our gas resources in Mozambique provides opportunity to open up that kind of conversation, to get the public involved in how they want to see their resources managed and how it benefits everybody. And over time, I mean, everybody will be better off if that is actually done. Ghana is still in the process of actually ensuring that what we have in law is what is actually delivered or implemented. And as I mentioned in the presentation, we have challenges when it comes to the 91% that actually comes to the budget to be spent. We have problems with the quality of projects that are delivered, the timeliness of the delivery of the projects, cost overrun, time overrun. So these are budget problems and public expenditure problems that we continue to work on. And it takes time, but we will push. And I hope Mozambique also starts quickly and push that conversation of bringing the public into how resources are governed. And that strays into the question that Anabela asked about domestic investment versus, external investments. I think this is one of the key contestations, really. You have the needs, you have challenges. Why not invest domestically? It brings up the key question of what you want to do with the sovereign wealth fund. And I mentioned that at the bare minimum, you want to maintain the value of that investment. In most of our countries, our currencies are depreciating at a faster rate. You inject the sovereign wealth fund 2 years later, it is less than half of the value on the domestic front. And in Ghana's case, if we had put between 2011 and now, the cedi has depreciated more than 400%. So if you invested in your currency, you wouldn't have that value in dollar terms today. So these are some of the challenges you have to navigate. Is your economy stable enough to at least maintain the value of the investment? That has to be considered. And also the governance processes around investment. Is it the same government role that would oversight the investment? Then that raises questions about the public financial management and the outcomes that have been achieved with the 90% that will go into the budget ultimately. And we also have to pay attention that in most cases, the World Fund is not the larger chunk of the money. And for the you're not going to set aside 50% of the revenue that is coming, or 30% of the money that is coming for long-term sovereign wealth fund. You're just allocating a share. In Ghana's case, as mentioned, it's 9% into the heritage fund, and then about 21% into the stabilization fund, which of course is still available for the budget, because the minister cap it, use the SS for debt servicing, contingency spending. So it's not so much of the revenue that is coming in. And I think we may need another forum to talk about bigger revenue management conversations on how do you optimize the total revenue to be able to account for the needs of the youth, the small scale businesses that are budding. How do you ensure that in the framing of your budget, you account for these needs and promote development with the allocations into the budget and still make room for savings for the future budget. Okay, Prof.
Thank you very much, Benjamin, for this clarification. I think I don't have more questions from the chat box. I will ask our distinguished panelists to have the last round of comments and questions if they have. Over to you, Dr. Marcelina.
Can you hear me now? Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I think I will just comment. I don't have further questions because I think Benjamin has gone through responding to the questions that has been raised. I'll just comment because I think I have made myself misunderstood. When I was talking about the Norway case, I'm not necessarily saying that Mozambique will adopt that experience. I'm not saying we'll spend 20 years, then we will create the sovereign fund. That's not a statement from my side. I think I have mentioned the Norway case as a case study. As I also mentioned, the Timor as one of the cases that we know about what they did and what is happening, what was the impact. And I have also mentioned the Brazil, because Brazil has established the world sovereign, the sovereign wealth fund years ago, but still not active up to now, exactly because they still have current needs to satisfy or to deal with. But that doesn't mean that we cannot establish the fund now. We can establish the fund now. I also shared with you the diligence that the Ministry of Mineral Resources is taking in order to come up with a good proposal, if that is the case, on how we should establish that fund. This start from that Columbia University, it indicates that we could establish, for instance, this fund now, even before the exploitation starts from, for instance, the area 1 and 4, and establish, for instance, that a certain amount that should be channeled to that fund, has, for instance, Ghana did, like 7% should go to that fund. We can also do that. But we can establish, for instance, different figures, but that can be done only if all the stakeholders are engaged and we have gone through all the current needs and we establish a good legal framework. Because, for instance, in the Ghanaian case, the funds are there, but it seems that the Minister of Economy and Finance, or the Minister of Finance or Economy, has the power to, for instance, go there and decide on where the money should go. So I think those are the different experiences that I was sharing with you. just to show that the government of Mozambique, the Minister of Mineral Resources, is deeply engaged, trying to see what is the best way. And I'm happy because Benjamin said from these lessons learned, he believes that Mozambique might probably pick up the best one because we know several other examples. And I believe so, but it's still something that there's no decision made yet. So I'm not saying we should delay, we should spend 20 years or no. It recommends us to establish it right away and establish the terms and conditions to implement it. So that is the kind of engagements and due diligence that the Ministry of Mineral Resources is doing. I just want to clarify that. So if I made myself misunderstood, I'm just clarifying that there's no decision made on when and how much, how to manage. So those questions, I think I have mentioned in the end of my intervention, that those questions still need to be answered. And we will keep doing that. But in terms of current proposals, we actually have them, but we evaluate, and that's why when we invite this webinar, we immediately accept it and we participate. I think we are actively participating because it's important to have more examples and try to set up something that will make a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marcelina. Paula Monjane, she has alerted me to the fact that there is a whole pile of questions here. Technology, and I will read them to you. There are so many. I will pick few. Question 1, environment issues and sovereign wealth fund. Is there a clear policy on instruments to invest in instruments that are environmental friendly? Question 2, what was the clear contribution of sustainable in the midst of the pandemic? I want to get feeling in terms of percentages. Question 3, in Stabilization Fund, are there rules regarding what kind of payments or investments should be covered with these funds? Question 4, what are the players involved during the process of setting the Revenue Management Act? Were there a kind of road shows? Then, can the Sovereign Wealth Fund play a role in supporting the fight against the conflict currently taking place in Mozambique? The place where these wealthy class gas reserves are, it is embroiled in a conflict. What should be the ideal way to involve the civil society in the design and management of the Sovereign Wealth Fund? In many ways, Mozambique is similar to Angola, which created and managed a sovereign fund. What have the Mozambican government society learned from the Angola's experience? We'll have an opportunity to discuss the Angola case. How can the question of the debt situation and the creation of a sovereign fund be applied to Mozambique? Is Mozambique that simply too big for that? Can or should the Sovereign Wealth Fund play a role in achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? So this is Siri Johnson from the University of Copenhagen. As for Mozambique, accountability and corruption is one of the Achilles heels right now. Without solving those, I don't believe the management of the Sovereign Wealth Fund will be better than the average management we have so far. When it comes to economic stability, I think that would be the currencies and subject to fluctuations. Therefore, the depreciation shouldn't necessarily be a burden, but how these funds are managed should be at everyone's attention and concern. These are some of the questions. Some of them will be addressed in the next webinars, but you can look at some of these. You have 5 minutes because we're already winding up. Over to you, Benjamin.
Yeah, thanks. I think there are a host of questions there, but maybe to sum it up, I want to say that the object, in most cases, of sovereign wealth fund is really to provide that future resources for support budget for future generations. But when you have a fund that has grown to be big enough, you can then allocate portions. Even when you are still producing oil, you can still allocate portions in the budget for various considerations, and that could be part of solving environmental problems, community problems, conflict management, and all that. But essentially, what you want to do is that in the scheme of managing your revenues and the sector, all these considerations are factors so that it doesn't become a burden on sovereign wealth fund. For example, issues of environment, there are laws that should ensure that the polluter pays. The company is actually responsible for their impact on the environment, and the state has agencies that ought to manage that. If revenue has to go into specific mitigation, a chunk of the money is still available to the budget, which should be programmed to be able to attend to the needs of the country and not necessarily derail the purpose of the sovereign wealth fund. And the SDGs should all be programmed into the general expenditure patterns of the government, because the budget is supposed to mitigate all the challenges that the country has. And the SDGs to be achieved, you have to make this line to the budget of the country and not necessarily the sovereign wealth fund. But if you have a bigger fund that can make contribution to specific interventions, that could be discussed. And that's where context becomes important, and the conversation with stakeholders become extremely relevant to see what can be done at any particular time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. I will give an opportunity to Paula Monjan to wind up some final comments and remarks. Over to you, Paula.
Thank you, Adriano, and thank you all. Basically, it was great to hear the experience from Ghana. We learn a lot, but we also stay with questions which we think we can deep understand by continuing our conversations with Dr. Benjamin and the others. I just want to mention and say that as FMO, we are interested, as I said before, in public finance management as a whole, which goes beyond the sovereign fund and includes, in this case, a management of the revenues coming from natural resources. So it's our interest, just to clarify, that we will and we are interested to also look to how all revenues on all resources are managed, particularly related with these natural resources. We will continue to engage with relevant stakeholders to contribute, but also to demand for good governance, particularly on fiscal transparency, accountability, and a broader participation to guarantee that those resources will be inclusive and will reach the most needed population. Specifically on sovereign funds, we see our role in facilitating these processes of knowledge gathering, knowledge sharing, knowledge learning, so that civil society, but also government can learn from this process. So we will continue doing this. As we have mentioned before, this is the first one. And I think it was useful, and we hope that you have enjoyed the time that we spend. And again, thank you, Dr. Benjamin. Thank you, Jeniffer. Thank you, colleagues from the Ministry of Mineral Resources and Energy, and the colleagues all from the panel. So I think this is a moment that we think that we have set up a process where we can continue discussing, and the discussion will go on, and we expect that the contributions will come. And thank you, all the participants.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paula. It is the end of our first of a series of 7 webinars aimed at discussing the Sovereign Wealth Fund as an opportunity to catalyze good governance and fiscal transparency. Again, this is an opportunity to, as Paula has mentioned, to gathering the necessary knowledge. Not all issues questions were addressed. Many of them, they will be discussed in the subsequent webinars. To the distinguished panelists, to Jeniffer, a special thanks to Benjamin and to the Africa Center for Energy Policy for the very good work that you are doing in West Africa aimed at improving good governance and linking that with the improvement of the livelihoods of the people in that region. Thank you very much for the very good collaboration. Thank you very much all. I wish you a very good Friday, and the next webinar is on the next Thursday. Next Thursday is the next webinar, and we will have Dr. Samuel Atiko to share the Nigerian experience. Looking forward to meeting you all next Thursday, and thank you to the very good partnership with the Tax Authority, the Ministry of Mineral Resources and Energy, to FMO, and to the platform. Thank you so much, and stay blessed. Thank you.